Hey guys, tonight, we're going back to the year 536 AD when the sky dimmed, the temperature dropped, and the world started to unravel. The sky overhead, a lifeless gray. The sun, normally bold and blinding, now barely glows like a smudged coin behind gauze. No clouds, no stars. Just a flat, endless murk stretching from horizon to horizon. You don't know why it's happening. No one does. But your gut tells you this isn't normal weather. This is something worse. You wrap yourself tighter in your cloak, even though it's midsummer. Birds don't sing anymore. They just vanish. The crops that should be thick with grain hang limp. You hear your neighbor whisper that it's the end of days. A priest claims it's punishment. But the shepherd says it's the sky's fault. The sun hasn't shone properly in weeks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you're listening. I love seeing how far this little channel travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a dust-covered path, noticing the way your own breath fogs in front of your face, even though it's late June. Summer doesn't smell like this. Summer should smell like earth and sweat, hay and heat. But today the air has a cold, metallic bite, like ash, like something burned very, very far away, and the wind carried the ghosts of that fire straight to you. In Constantinople, they're saying the sun rises but casts no shadow. Just a dim orange smear that makes sundials useless. In Ireland, monks scratch in trembling Latin that a thick fog has covered the sky for a full year. You haven't seen blue in months. You're not sure if it'll ever come back. And here's the thing, they're not exaggerating. This isn't just peasant rumor. It's not an allegory or a fever dream. Roman historians like Procopius note it in their scrolls. The sun, he writes, gave forth its light without brightness like the moon. You glance up at that miserable sky and squint. Yep, moonlight. At noon. And it's not just the darkness, it's what comes with it. Days grow shorter, nights colder. Snow falls in China during summer. Crops across the world fail at once. You bite into a carrot and taste bitter frost. It shouldn't taste like that. Not now. Not this season. You think back to the morning it all started. You were out chopping wood. The birds went quiet. The sun rose, but your shadow didn't follow you. And as the day wore on, that eerie half-light didn't go away. It was like being trapped inside a painting stuck at dusk. Your grandmother swore she'd seen something like this once. But she also said she saw a wolf made of fire dance across the river, so you weren't sure how seriously to take it. Still, it lingers. That primal fear. That feeling that the world is off, like the gods themselves have paused the game. Scientists centuries later will pull ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica, deep frozen cylinders of history. And inside those frozen layers, they'll find a spike of sulfur volcanic glass and ash around, you guessed it. 536 AD. Historians still argue whether the cause was a supervolcano in the northern hemisphere or something even stranger. But you standing in your brittle boots don't care what it was. You just want it to stop. You think maybe it'll clear up tomorrow. Maybe the winds will shift and the sun will come back in full. But tomorrow arrives and nothing. Still gray, still cold, and the livestock start dying. You pass a dead lamb on the road, its eyes milky ribs like the lines of a harp. The shepherd doesn't even move to bury it. He just stares off, murmuring something about the end. At night, the stars are gone. Not hidden. Gone. Like someone scrubbed the heavens clean. You feel a peculiar dizziness when you look up, like the sky's too close, pressing down on you. A Persian traveler visiting India during this time writes that a great evil covered the land. You wonder if he saw what you saw: trees budding too late, rivers running low, and nights so quiet you could hear mice chewing in the thatch. You sit by a fire and sip barley tea, thin, bitter, and nearly your last. Your village elder tries to cheer everyone up by saying this has happened before, that in ancient times a mountain exploded and blocked the sun. But even he sounds unsure. A fringe tale spreads that this is the tale of a dragon brushing against the sky, smearing its soot across the stars. You'd laugh if you weren't so cold. It's said that in some parts of the world, probably Ireland, maybe Scotland, there was a year without bread. Not a season, a year. The Great Famine didn't announce itself with thunder. It crept in with silence. And meanwhile, the forests stay still. No birdsong, just creaking branches and dry leaves. Even the bees are gone. That's when you know it's serious. No bees, no honey, no pollination, no spring. You hear that across the sea in Mesoamerica. Mayan priests notice something strange in their calendars: eclipses that don't match the sky. Rituals are delayed. Sacrifices increase. Even they don't understand what's happening, and they were practically experts in celestial oddities. But you're just trying to keep your family warm. You wrap your child in the last wool blanket and lie beside her on the stone floor, both of you listening to the quiet. You used to fall asleep to crickets, now it's just wind, and sometimes not even that. You start to wonder if the sun's gone forever, if it'll never return. You're scared to say it aloud, because if you do, it might make it true. And so you do what humans have always done when the world stops making sense. You wait. You hope. You endure. But deep down, you know something has broken, and it may never go back to the way it was. The first time you realize summer has betrayed you, it's a morning in late July. Your breath ghosts in the air like it's November. You pull your tunic tighter, fingers stiff and fumbling, as you gather what should have been ripe wheat, but the stalks crumble in your hand like dry straw. They never even reached full height. You glance at the sun, or rather where it should be, and see only a pale smear in a bone-colored sky. You try to tell yourself it's just a cold front, an unlucky year, a fluke. But the cold doesn't leave. Not in August, not in September, not even by October, when your bones ache like it's the dead of winter. There's no word for global cooling in your language. No climate theory, no maps showing pressure systems. But what you do understand is that something unnatural is happening. You look at your sheep, thin and huddled, at your dwindling grain sack, at the children too tired to play. The warmth has vanished, not just from the earth, but from the rhythm of life itself. Modern science will later suggest the temperatures in 536 dropped by 2.5 degrees Celsius on average, sometimes more. That may not sound catastrophic when you've got central heating and thermal socks, but in a subsistence farming world, where survival balances on the edge of a rusty blade, that's not just a dip, that's a death sentence. You trudge through slush that shouldn't exist this time of year. Snow falls in China in mid-June, scaring farmers and freezing saplings. In Ireland, chronicles later call it a failure of bread. In the Mediterranean, olive trees fail to blossom. Fruit trees produce small, bitter offerings, as if the earth itself is in mourning. And you're hungry. Not just skipping meals hungry. We're talking dreaming of turnips hungry. You start noticing how sharp your cheekbones look in puddle reflections. Your knees knock together when you kneel. You begin counting meals backward. When did you last eat meat? 5 days ago, 7. You pass a neighbor who's boiling pine needles into soup. He offers you a sip. It tastes like broom handles, but you say thank you anyway. The animals notice too. Flocks migrate late. Fish don't spawn in their usual spots. Chickens stop laying. Your cow gives less milk each week and then none at all. She stares at you with sunken eyes that seem to ask, what happened? Historians still argue whether the cooling came from volcanic winter or an enormous meteor impact stirring dust into the atmosphere. Some suggest multiple eruptions, perhaps in Iceland, El Salvador, or North America, layered ash into the stratosphere like dirty frosting. But you, wrapped in threadbare wool and clutching a bowl of gruel, don't care where the cold comes from. You just know it's here. You move slower now, partly because your joints hurt, partly because there's not much to do when the earth's gone quiet. Even the pests seem to starve. The rats are gone. The flies are dead. The buzzing of summer, that lazy humming sound you once hated, is nothing but a memory now. At night, you lie awake listening to your stomach groan like a beast. Your partner tries to sing the children to sleep, voice cracking from dryness. The song is the same lullaby her mother sang during the last famine, but this time the notes feel thinner, like even music is malnourished. You start marking the days by how cold it gets in the morning. Instead of sunrises, you track frost layers. You find a lump of moldy cheese in your cellar and honestly consider it a blessing. In some parts of Northern Europe, archaeological layers from this period show a decline in human waste. Yep, less poop in the record, which likely means fewer people were eating or surviving. You walk past the village well and overhear two elders debating whether this is the winter of the gods. One blames the Christian god. Another says it's Woden's punishment. You just roll your eyes? You'd worship the goose god of soup if it meant getting warm. People begin to leave. Not just in your town, but everywhere. Migrations begin, quiet ones, desperate ones. Families sneak out at dawn, seeking places with more food, better soil, fewer bodies. You consider leaving too, but where would you even go? The sky is gray in every direction. In Constantinople, Emperor Justinian's court shivers under layers of fur. He orders emergency grain shipments, but the ships arrive late or never. In the Alps, mountain passes become impassable even in July. You hear tales of entire caravans vanishing in sudden whiteouts. A monk named John of Ephesus writes of a sign from God, a sun that gives no light. A traveler from Syria mentions that food is so scarce people boil leather shoes to make broth. You're not there yet. But you did gnaw a candle once, and it wasn't terrible. On the fringes, a few scholars try to measure this strange cold. They carve sundials that never quite work, sketch star charts missing half the stars. One eccentric monk insists it's the fault of a fire-breathing lizard sleeping beneath the earth. He has a crude drawing. It's not terrible. Still, you press on. Because that's what people do. You gather sticks. You trade needles for oats. You walk into the forest looking for something, anything edible. You find a patch of mushrooms and bring them home with cautious hope. Spoiler, they weren't the good kind. You spend the next 2 days seeing geometric patterns in the ceiling beams and trying to explain your dreams to a skeptical goat. But even in the middle of that feverish spiral, the cold remains. You start telling yourself, this is just the new normal. That maybe the sun will stay faint. That maybe you'll adapt. People always do right. You add extra straw to your bed. You sew rabbit pelts into your boots. You hold your child close and whisper that it'll be better next season. But deep down, a quiet voice keeps whispering what you already suspect. This isn't a season. It's an era. You wake up one morning, and the hunger is louder than your thoughts. Your belly doesn't just ache, it gnaws. It growls like a caged beast. Your hands shake as you tie your belt tighter, not to keep your pants up. They're already loose, but to trick your body into thinking it's full. The village has changed. The air is filled with a kind of silence that's not peaceful, it's hollow. People used to talk at the well, barter in the square, argue over sheep fencing. Now they barely look at one another. Too tired, too thin, too focused on the simple task of getting through the day. You head to your field, what's left of it. The soil looks fine at first glance, but it's exhausted, depleted. Your cabbage heads are stunted and bitter. Your barley is more weed than grain. You dig anyway, turning the earth with the slow, desperate rhythm of someone who has no better idea. You remember how the elders used to warn about famine. It always sounded so dramatic. People eating shoe leather, children begging in the streets. But now it's not a story. It's real. You see it on every face. That man who used to be plump and red-cheeked, hollow eyes and bird-bone wrists now. The baker's daughter who always wore ribbons in her hair, bald patches. Rickets in her knees. She still tries to smile, though. You nod back. She's braver than most. Across the world, the symptoms match. In Ireland, annals describe a failure of bread from the 11th year onward. In China, the Book of Sui notes that yellow dust rained like snow and that crops failed repeatedly. In Italy, grain stores ran out long before spring. And then there's you nibbling on boiled roots that taste like dirt and bitterness. It's amazing how quickly your standards drop. A week ago, you wouldn't touch this stuff. Today, it's the highlight of your diet. There's a strange economy developing around survival. People trade things they swore they'd never part with. Heirloom brooches for sacks of old grain, leather boots for a single salted fish. Someone even offers their wedding ring for a smoked rat. You're not proud of what you've traded. You don't want to talk about the time you swapped your neighbor a carved flute for half a turnip and a cup of warm milk. Historians still argue whether the worst hunger hit in 536 or the year after, when the cumulative crop failures really began to bite. But on the ground here, in your ragged shoes and worn-out gloves, it all blurs together. Hunger doesn't follow a calendar. Some folks start boiling tree bark. Others eat moss or grass or anything that might quiet the stomach for an hour or two. You try chewing on dried dandelion roots, bitter but filling. Sort of. Then there are the mushroom stories. Always the mushrooms. Your cousin tried the wrong kind. His stomach, bloated, eyes rolled back, and he died curled up under the chicken coop. No one had the energy to bury him properly. You covered him with a cloth and prayed. There are darker whispers too. Things people don't say aloud during the day. Like the family on the edge of the forest that disappeared after the father brought home meat that didn't look quite normal. You don't ask questions. You don't want the answers. Meanwhile, rulers struggle to respond. In Constantinople, Justinian orders food shipments, but there's not enough to go around. In Persia, tax relief is offered, but many people are already gone. Across the Byzantine Empire, urban life starts to unravel. Markets stall, temples empty, and the rich retreat to estates surrounded by walls. You think of your cousin again, and it hits you the weak are dying. And the rest of you, you're just next in line. Sometimes you dream of food, banquets, roasted goose, honeyed dates, steaming bread with melted cheese. You wake up chewing air and feel the dull burn of disappointment in your belly. One day, a traveler passes through your village. His skin is grayish. He coughs constantly, but he brings news. Says there are towns where they're planting new crops, hardier, faster-growing ones. Says monks are experimenting with cold-resistant grains. You want to believe him. You need to believe him. But something in his eyes says it's mostly lies. There's still no sun. Just that dim, flat light that makes everything feel like the inside of a fading memory. You miss the heat. Not just warmth on your skin, but the feeling of growth of time moving forward. Now every day feels stuck, suspended in a slow, miserable fog. A fringe theory emerges, one not many believe but still whispered, that a massive eruption somewhere distant like the Rabaul caldera or Ilopango clouded the atmosphere with ash. Modern science supports this idea. Ice core records show a dramatic spike in volcanic sulfate around this time. But you sitting by a cold hearth and gnawing on acorn bread don't care which volcano it was. You care that nothing grows, and the hunger brings something else: desperation. You've seen people steal before, sure, but not like this. Not from their own families. Not raiding gardens at midnight or breaking into grain stores with knives. The blacksmith caught a boy stealing oats and didn't beat him. He just cried. Said the boy looked exactly like his son. Some people try prayers, others turn to old gods. A few even start strange rituals, sacrifices of animals, or even hair and teeth left on stones under gray skies. It's all symbolic. It's all futile. But it gives people a sense of control. A story to tell themselves, if we do this, the sun will come back. But the sun doesn't come back. Not yet. And so you wait. Hungry, cold, and hollow. You dig for roots. You gather moss. You stretch what's left in your larder until it's nothing but memory. And every time your stomach clenches with that sharp, familiar pain, you mutter the same thing: tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow the warmth will return. But deep down, even you don't believe it. You step outside one morning, and the air tastes like grit. Not smoke, not dust. Something stranger. It's like licking a clay bowl that's been left too close to a fire. You rub your eyes. They burn. There's a thin film on everything: your windowsill, the leaves, even your own skin. It clings. Gritty, pale, and somehow oily. You wipe your hands on your tunic and realize it's not just dirt. It's something from the sky. Later, you'll learn that microscopic particles from volcanic ash can travel thousands of miles in the atmosphere, settling like invisible snow over entire continents. But today, all you know is this: you're breathing it. It gets into your lungs, makes your throat raw. Your cough starts dry and shallow but deepens into a bark. So does everyone else's. The entire village sounds like a sick kennel. You pass an old man hacking into a rag streaked with black. He folds it and walks on like it's normal. Some days the sun doesn't rise at all, not really. The world slips from dark gray to light gray, and back again, with no true morning or evening. Time starts to blur. No shadows, no warmth. Just hours that feel like gray soup, thin, bland, endless. Scholars now suspect the ash came from a massive volcanic eruption, possibly in the tropics. El Salvador's Ilopango has been floated, but the debate still swirls like well ash. Some evidence even suggests a double punch: one eruption in 536 followed by another in 540. But you're not in a lab. You're in a world that's choking. You walk to your garden and dig. The soil smells wrong, like burnt metal. You find a few withered roots covered in a dust that doesn't brush off. You taste one and it leaves a layer of bitterness on your tongue that lasts the whole day. And it's not just food that's dying, it's color. The grass turns grayish. Trees drop their leaves early and don't bother with new ones. Birds, when you do see them, look dull, less plumage, less song. Even your clothes seem to fade. Your red scarf becomes a muddy rust. Everything's fading into ash. And still, no one really knows what's happening. You hear rumors from across the mountains, entire cities, abandoned rivers, turning strange colors, sunrises like blood. You meet a traveler who says there's fire falling from the sky in the far north. Another says a mountain exploded and cursed the air. One woman swears she saw a black rainbow. You laugh, but only to stop yourself from screaming. In Constantinople, Procopius writes about a year when the sun gave forth its light without brightness like the moon. You don't know his name, but you felt the same confusion in your chest each morning. You light a candle at noon, not for prayer, just to see your own hands. You start avoiding mirrors. Not that they show much anymore, just a hollow version of you, grainy and ghost-like. Your skin feels dry, your hair brittle. You try to clean yourself with water from the stream, but even that smells strange now. One afternoon you go to the stream and notice the water runs slower than usual. There's a dull sheen on its surface. You dip your fingers in and your skin itches. Nothing serious, but it's not normal. Your goats avoid it too. They sniff and walk away. Back in the village, someone tries to dig a deeper well. The water that comes up is brown. Boiling it doesn't help. It leaves rings in the pot. You're not sure if it's safe, but you drink it anyway. Because what else is there? You remember when rain used to smell fresh, clean, like life. Now it smells burned, like something's cooking in the sky and dropping bits of it on your house. Historians still argue whether the haze was due to volcanic aerosols, sulfur-rich clouds, or a mixture of both. One fringe theory suggests a comet exploded in the atmosphere, shattering into dust that circled the planet. Wild idea, sure, but after months in this mess, nothing sounds that crazy anymore. The strangest part is how normal it starts to feel. You adjust to the constant twilight. You stop checking the horizon for sunrise. You just light your candle earlier and call it a day. Your world shrinks. No more trips to the next village. No more traders on the road. Just your home, your dwindling food, and the weird ash-colored world outside. You pass children drawing in the dust. One draws a circle in the sky and says it's the dead sun. You don't correct him. When you sleep, you dream of brighter skies, of heat, of sweat on your brow as you pick peaches in the sun. You wake up cold, always cold. People start covering their mouths with cloths. Not for fashion, not for modesty, just to keep the grit out. You do it too. It helps a little, but the cough never goes away. Your neighbor builds a shrine in his yard, a circle of rocks with a sun symbol in the middle. He lights a candle every morning and prays for the return of light. You scoff at first, but you catch yourself watching the flame longer than you should. Some say the gods are angry. Others say they've left. One old woman starts telling stories of a time before this, a golden age, she calls it. When flowers grew in every yard, and the sun made shadows so long they danced across the ground. Her stories make the kids cry. You can't blame them. It sounds like fiction now. But the worst part, the waiting. Not knowing if the sky will ever clear, if food will ever grow again, if the cough will stop. You live one gray day at a time, and no one dares to hope too loudly. Because what if this is forever? You scrape a layer of ash from your doorstep and sigh. The wind picks up, swirling it right back again. You hear it first, not from a traveler or merchant, but from the village drunk muttering to himself in a slurred whisper by the fountain. Fire in the north, he says. Burnt the sky, froze the sea. God screamed. You think it's just another fever tale like the comet that ate the moon or the talking deer from last month's gossip. But later the priest mentions it too. Then the healer. Then a passing tanner who swears he crossed a frozen fjord in summer. You listen closer. Something did happen in the north. In Scandinavia, sagas will later echo with eerie familiarity. Tales of Fimbulvetur, the Great Winter. A time of unending cold when snow falls from all directions and the sun fails to rise. sound familiar. You walk through the village square as old men talk about a time when wolves ran across the sea ice and the sun vanished for 3 winters. You laugh, or try to, but inside your stomach knots, because it's not just a myth anymore. It's what's happening. And while scholars in the far future will debate whether Norse legends were inspired by actual events or merely metaphor, they'll all agree on one thing: someone up there lived through something terrifying. You try to imagine what it was like, up near the edge of the world, where even in good years, warmth is a brief guest. Imagine it now when everything's cold, dim, and strange. Some theories say that in parts of modern-day Norway or Sweden, fire rained from the sky. Maybe not literal fire, but ash embers, soot. Fallout from an eruption somewhere far away. Others suggest the event began in the north, that perhaps a volcano under the Arctic ice spewed sulfur into the air, launching a blanket of aerosols into the stratosphere. Historians still argue whether the cause was regional or global. Did the North simply get hit harder, or was it the source you don't know? You just know the stories match the sky you see now. A bard from a traveling troupe sings an old song by the fire one night. His voice is hoarse, but his melody is clear. It's about 3 winters without summer wolves that feast by daylight, and a sun that sets but never returns. You stop chewing your stale bread and stare into the flame. He calls it Ragnarok. You've heard that name before, a tale of gods falling of a world swallowed in darkness. It always seemed like fiction. But now you start to wonder. Is this how it began? Not with thunder and lightning, but with a slow, creeping grayness that settled over everything. Further north in lands you'll never see. Archaeologists will later uncover signs of collapse, villages, abandoned farms, left to rot forests, reclaiming once tilled fields. People simply walked away, fled south, or didn't survive at all. And then there are the burials, mass graves in some areas, skeletons stacked without markers, no offerings, no ritual, just hasty endings, the kind you only make when you're too cold or too scared to care about proper farewells. One eccentric traveler tells you about reindeer bones found atop melted ice layers. He says there was once a herd that died all at once, frozen mid-step during a blizzard that came out of nowhere in a season where no blizzards should exist. You can't verify any of it. But again, you believe him. You look north, where the sky always seems heavier, and you think about those distant people draped in furs, building fires that barely kept out the chill, trying to survive a winter that had no end. You imagine a child up there squinting at the same pale sun as you, drawing warmth from a fire made of sea driftwood and dreams, and wondering why the gods had turned away. Then you feel a sudden gust of wind. It stings, smells like sulfur and snow, and for a moment, you're sure it came from the north. But it's not just Norse lands whispering of fire. Across the ocean, in places you've only heard of in riddles and merchant songs, tales surface of sky-darkening storms and the breath of the mountain gods. Some whisper that distant volcanoes, like Krakatoa, or even Iceland's Katla, might have been part of this great coughing of the earth. You stir the ashes in your hearth and try to picture it, massive plumes of smoke spiraling into the heavens, blotting out the sun like ink in water. Thunder rumbling not from the clouds, but from deep within the ground. And then, as now, people looking up at the sky with the same thought, what if it never clears? Meanwhile, your own breath still fogs in the morning. The crops still die. The birds still flee. Nothing has improved. But now there's a new fear. Not just of starvation, not just of cold, but of a story that's becoming true. Because myths, you realize, aren't always fiction. Sometimes they're just memories that got poetic. Sometimes the gods don't fall in fire and fury. Sometimes they just fade quietly, slowly under a sunless sky. You're at the market, what's left of it anyway, when the news arrives. A trader, face gaunt and beard caked in dust, arrives dragging a mule with bags that jingle like coins. But they don't hold money, just seeds. Old ones. Maybe still good, maybe not. He's come from the coast, he says, from the eastern edge of the Roman Empire. That catches your attention. Not because of the seeds, but because he says the empire is starting to crack. Your stomach twists, not from hunger this time, but from something worse, recognition. You'd hoped, like many, that the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, the last great glue holding things together, would ride out the strange, sunless year. But if they're unraveling? You lean closer as he speaks. Trade's dead, he says, eyes scanning the square. The ports are quiet. Grain from Egypt is stuck or spoiled. No one's sailing anymore. Not enough food to load. Not enough sailors left healthy to crew. Your mind drifts to those massive ships, once filled with olive oil cloth spices. Now maybe rats. Maybe nothing. Just hulks bobbing in poisoned harbors under a colorless sky. In Constantinople, the heart of the Eastern Empire, the mighty Emperor Justinian still rules. You remember his name, everyone does. His building projects his ambitious conquests. But now he's battling on too many fronts. Plague creeps in from the coasts. Crops fail in Anatolia. His advisors argue. His army loses morale. And the people, they riot over bread. Historians still argue whether Justinian's dreams of a revived Roman Empire died in 536, or if they simply crumbled slowly under the combined weight of disaster. But here in your ash-dusted village, you already know when trade routes falter, everything follows. You used to get salt from the south. Gone now. Spices, forget it. Even wool and wine have become rarities. Once you could trade a basket of pears for a silver needle. Now you'd need a small miracle just to barter for a moldy onion. But it's not just goods that vanish. People vanish. That cheerful merchant who always came from the next valley over, you haven't seen him in months. The wagon maker from the capital gone. The roads are empty except for the desperate, the sick, or the foolish. You glance around and notice the market is quieter. Not just fewer people, but less voice. No shouting, no bargaining, just whispers, hushed deals, eyes darting to doorways. Everyone's hoarding, everyone's afraid. One woman pulls you aside. She shows you a coin, Byzantine gold, stamped with the face of the emperor. Can't eat this, she says bitterly. Can't even trade it. Nobody cares what's on a coin if the bread is gone. And she's right. Gold doesn't feed a child. Oil lamps don't warm an empty room. Even books, precious handwritten tomes, have been burned for heat. You saw it with your own eyes, the priest tearing pages from a Latin scripture, feeding them one by one into the hearth. The empire's great roads, once pulsing with life, are now lifeless threads. Caravans travel in groups, again armed and fearful. Pirates swarm the weakened coasts. Bandits stalk the mountain passes, and nobody rides for free. Someone mentions Antioch, once a jewel of the East. Now its aqueducts run dry. Its churches sit half empty. Some districts have burned from riots over spoiled wheat. The governor begged for aid. None came. You pause and think. If Antioch is falling, what hope is there for anywhere else? A trader near you shares a quieter rumor that in Egypt upriver from Alexandria, the harvests have failed for 2 years running. The Nile is sluggish, fewer fish, less silt. The granaries are empty. The pharaohs once called it the breadbasket of the empire. Now it's just a basket, broken and rattling. Meanwhile, Justinian sends soldiers westward to reclaim lost Roman lands. But what's the point? You wonder if there's nothing left to feed them, And it's not just the empire's edges buckling, it's its very foundations. Temples have fewer worshippers. The poor grow poorer. Nobles hoard and hide. Cities turn inward. Walls go up. Smiles vanish. Even time seems fractured. The year doesn't follow normal rules. Seasons blur. Festivals are skipped. Calendars aren't even reliable anymore. One scholar tries to fix the problem by building a new timekeeping device, something using dripping water and shadowless light, but the water freezes and the light never shines. You shake your head. Every empire is a network of trust, trade, and timing. All three are gone. And just like that, the roads become quieter. The letters stop coming, and the empire, mighty, immortal, eternal, starts to feel like a story, a fable. You remember a merchant once told you that Rome fell in stages. That first you lose your grain, then your soldiers, then your songs, then your stories, and finally you lose the name itself. But here in 536, as the sun stays pale and the people grow thin, you begin to wonder, maybe this is what an empire dying slowly feels like. Not with a bang, not with a war, but with silence. Across the world, far from your village and the crumbling cities of the Roman East, another land feels the creeping cold and answers it not with riots, but with rituals. You don't know it yet, but in China something ancient is breaking. Not just crops and commerce, but beliefs. In the southern Chen dynasty and the northern Wei, strange portents trouble the court. The weather is off, the rice fails, locusts descend, and worst of all, ghosts. Yes, ghosts. They call it the ghost season, a time when famine and spirits walk side by side. When the ancestors are restless, angry, or simply hungry, you sit by your hearth and chew boiled weeds, unaware that across the continent others are doing the same, sitting quietly as night falls, hoping their dead don't show up. In the Buddhist monasteries of Luoyang, candles burn low, offerings thin. The monks chant sutras to ward off the unseen, but it's not working. Fewer pilgrims come, fewer donations, fewer grains to share. The bells still ring, but only to half-filled halls. It wasn't supposed to be like this. China was entering a cultural bloom, poetry, philosophy, invention. But the skies have changed. The harvests betray. The emperors shuffle between capitals looking for auspicious signs that never arrive. And people talk. They say the mandate of heaven has weakened, that the emperor no longer speaks for the cosmos. Historians still argue whether this period of environmental disaster contributed to the fall of the Northern Wei and the unrest that would soon tear through the Sui and Tang dynasties. But you don't need historians to tell you what it feels like when order slips. You recognize it in their stories. The anxiety, the hunger, the turning inward. There's a woman in Chang'an who burns her last stick of incense to keep the fox spirits away. A farmer in the Yellow River Basin ties red cords to every doorframe, hoping the evil winds won't enter. In Buddhist texts from this era, even the gods seem distant, distracted, as if heaven itself is dimmed, and the weather it's just as cruel there. Snow falls in summer, rivers shrink, fields crack and flake. In some records, the sun is described as bluish-white, barely visible. Sound familiar. You find a scroll maybe passed to your village by a wandering monk. It's old brittle, translated through 3 tongues. It tells of a year when the sky forgot fire, and you think, yes, that's it exactly. Meanwhile, some Chinese officials try to fix things the only way they know, through bureaucracy. Edicts are sent. Rice is redistributed. Farmers are urged to dig deeper wells. But you know how that works. By the time a scroll travels hundreds of miles, the rice is already moldy. The people have already moved on, or died. There are strange tidings, too. You hear that astrologers have begun to argue over the stars, that the moon has a new face, that comets linger too long in the sky, and that some sages are seeing dragon shapes in the clouds. Not real dragons, heavenly ones. Metaphors, maybe. Or maybe the sky really is angry. One fringe tidbit says that in Sichuan, a sect begins to preach about a new age of darkness, that the gods have turned their faces, and only ritual fasting and silence can appease the coming age. Their temples are always quiet. Too quiet. And there's that phrase again, the mandate of heaven. You hear it from a traveler who once studied at court. He explains that in Chinese political theory, the emperor rules because heaven wills it. But if the world suffers, if rivers flood, if fields freeze, if ash chokes the sky, then clearly the mandate is lost. The farmer rebels begin to sharpen their blades. You think back to your own village where the local lord still collects taxes despite the dead harvest. You think, what if we had a mandate of heaven too? What if the ruler did need to prove he deserved power every year? Because here's the truth, when food disappears, stories replace it. And in China, the stories are getting darker. A traveling monk named Faxian once described sacred lands filled with golden light. But now the pilgrims carry lanterns just to see the road. The sacred mountains are silent. Even the animals seem afraid. You imagine a temple courtyard still dusted with snow in summer. A lone monk brushing soot from a prayer stone. He whispers to a statue that doesn't answer. Half a world away, and yet the silence feels exactly the same. You return to your hut and light a taper. The wax drips too quickly, the flame dances sideways, as if the air isn't sure which way to move. You catch yourself muttering a prayer to a god you haven't named in years. You don't think it will work, but you say it anyway. Because maybe, just maybe, someone or something is listening. The fever starts with a cough. You hear it one evening from across the road, a child hacking in the dark, short little gasps that don't stop. At first you think it's the ash again, the gritty air that scrapes everyone's throat raw. But then someone says the child has a rash, that her mother's hands are shaking, that the black spots have appeared. Your blood goes cold. You've heard rumors, ugly ones from the coast. Whispers of a sickness arriving with ships, a disease that moves faster than horses and leaves whole towns silent. You think it's just fear talking, until your neighbor dies. Just 3 days before she was helping stir oat porridge over a smoky fire. Then the spots came deep red, purple-black, like bruises from within. She stopped speaking. Her eyes glazed. Then she stopped breathing. And just like that, the plague is at your door. Not metaphorically, not in a poem or parable, literally. At your door. You close it. Bar it. Stack firewood against the entrance, as if that will stop it. But deep down, you know you're too late. Historians will eventually call it the Plague of Justinian, one of the first recorded pandemics in the Western world. And while its most famous wave comes a few years later in 541, it's already stirring in the East during this time of cold hunger and fear. Some even suggest the strange weather may have helped trigger it. Rats driven from the cold move into homes and grain stores. Fleas seeking warm blood jump from host to host. Trade, though weakened, still connects cities, and disease is the one commodity that never stops moving. You feel it before you see it. A kind of stillness in the town square. People walking wide arcs around one another. No more hugs, no more handshakes. Just lowered eyes and scarf-covered faces. You find yourself checking your skin daily, looking for the telltale signs. You scratch at a mosquito bite and panic. You burn your tunic just to be safe. In Constantinople, the plague will soon devastate the population. Tens of thousands dead in weeks. Bodies carted out of houses and thrown into pits. Justinian himself will catch it and survive, but just barely. His hair will fall out. His health will never recover. And the empire, it will never be the same. But you're not in Constantinople. You're just a villager waiting for your fever to arrive. You hear stories, people collapsing mid-prayer, whole families dead before anyone notices, priests afraid to give last rites, doctors disappearing, graves dug so shallow that dogs dig them up by morning. You try not to think about it. But the fear is everywhere. You start boiling everything water, clothes, food. You stop touching your own face. You keep a knife on you not for defense, but in case you need to cut away something infected. One night you wake from a fever dream and smell something awful, sweet, rotted, thick. You step outside. 3 houses down, they're burning a body. You don't ask whose. The fire flickers strangely in the ash-laden air. It casts no real light, just orange ghosts dancing on soot. You stand there watching. You're too tired to cry, too scared to go near, but too human to turn away. The next morning, a cart rolls slowly through the village. 2 men in cloaks, faces wrapped in linen, call out in flat voices, "Dead or dying, bring them out. You stay inside." But the woman across the lane doesn't. She stumbles out, one hand clutching her belly, the other dragging her son who isn't moving. Her eyes are glassy, her mouth foams. You close your door and bar it again. Later, you learn a fringe theory that the volcanic ash may have altered ecosystems just enough to push rodent populations into new places. That maybe the plague isn't just a tragedy, it's an aftershock. A ripple in a planet that's still reeling from the blast of 536. Historians still argue whether the 2 events are connected, whether the volcanic winter and the plague were coincidences or consequences. You don't argue. You're too busy surviving. Some people flee. They think they can outrun it. Others hide, believing silence will spare them. A few grow wild, cutting their hair, smearing ash across their faces, praying to gods both old and new. And a rare few get lucky. You wake up one day and feel a strange absence in the air. The coughing has stopped. Not everywhere, but nearby. No new fevers, no more fires. You don't celebrate. You don't exhale. You just wait. Because now you know, even when the sky looks clear, disaster doesn't knock. It seeps in, quietly, softly, through breath, through skin, through the people you love. And the worst part, it doesn't care. There was a time when the Franks were the rising force muscles flexing across Western Europe, golden crosses, gleaming kings in bright cloaks and fresh iron helmets. Their borders were swelling, their farms were fruitful, and even the wine was decent. But now you're told even the Franks are starving. Word comes slowly by way of a fur trader who's traded his fox pelts for fermented cabbage and bruised apples. He's lean dangerously so and missing 2 toes. Frostbite, he says. Got caught crossing the river near the Frankish border. It froze in September. You stare at him. September. You try to picture it. Thick blocks of ice trapping boats in the Loire. Soldiers slipping on roads meant for carts. Chickens laying eggs like stones, if at all. And it's not just the cold. It's the loneliness. The interconnectedness that once made the Frankish kingdoms thrive is dissolving. Towns used to hum with activity, trade fairs, pilgrims' processions. Now they're silent, like someone turned the volume down on an entire country. You hear that King Theudebert of Austrasia still reigns, but it's not like before. His court is smaller, his treasury lighter, his enemies more confident. He sends emissaries to Rome for aid and gets only silence in return. And those proud Frankish warriors, they're thinning out, not from battle, but from cold and hunger. The fur trader says they've gone inward, guarding what little they have, abandoning border villages, pulling their grain stores into wooden fortresses. Frankish nobles who once threw feasts now ration salted meat and wear ragged furs like peasants. You picture a castle hall once full of roasted boar and dripping candle wax, now echoing with coughs and whispers. Historians still argue whether 536 marked a true political decline in the Frankish realms or merely a temporary retrenchment. But if you lived there in the winter fog with the taste of pine bark on your tongue, you wouldn't care much about technical terms. All you'd know is this: no one's coming to help. Trade collapses first. That's the pulse of every kingdom, and when it stops, the limbs go numb. You used to see Frankish knives and salted pork in your market. Gone now. Even their coins are rarer, lost to hoarders or melted down for tools. Someone offers you a rusted Frankish buckle, hoping you'll trade it for a dried apple. You shake your head. You can't eat copper. Then roads vanish. Not literally, of course, but no one's on them. No carts, no pilgrims, just mud, snow, and silence. Even bandits seem to have taken the year off. What's there to steal? And with the roads go the messages. Letters stop arriving. Royal edicts go unread. A noble sends a sealed scroll to his cousin in Rams, only to find the city half abandoned when the courier returns 2 months later with frostbite on his face and nothing to report. In the monasteries, scribes keep writing. That's what they do. They copy scripture, record births, and track deaths. But in 536 and the years that follow, even the ink begins to fade. The parchment grows brittle, and the scribes stop recording the weather because every entry would just say gray, cold, worse than yesterday. There's a priest in Metz who tries to explain the climate shift to his congregation. He says it's God's punishment, or perhaps a test. He wears layers now beneath his robes, and his sermons are shorter, partly because of the chill, partly because fewer people show up. The grand churches built with Frankish gold now echo with the sound of 1 or 2 pairs of boots. No one singing. The choir boys left months ago to work in the fields or beg. A fringe tidbit you hear from the fur trader, half mumbled and probably exaggerated claims that nobles in one Frankish stronghold used to heat their wine by soaking it with hot iron rods. Now they heat their water and drink it like soup. Nobility meets survival. The royal messengers begin traveling in twos, not for security, but for warmth. One rides ahead, the other walks beside the mule. Then they switch, just to keep the blood flowing. And as the cold stretches on year after year, even the borders blur. No one's invading. No one's defending. The land forgets where one kingdom ends and another begins. You imagine King Theudebert sitting by a brazier in a chamber too large for warmth to reach the corners, reading letters that ask for help he can't give, surrounded by advisors wrapped in wolfskin. You imagine him wondering if the sun will ever come back, or if his reign will end in frost and famine. And though you are far from his palace, you feel a strange connection to that lonely king. Because you too sit in the dark, eating the last of your withered roots, wondering if this winter has an end, or if it's simply the new face of the world. The Frankish dream isn't dead. Not yet. But it's gone quiet. And in this silence, you begin to understand something older than kingdoms, no matter how rich, no matter how mighty. Even kings can freeze. You wake to fog again, thick and still, like a blanket pulled too tightly across the world. The hills, once green, now wear muted gray cloaks. You can't see the tree line. The air tastes like stone. And in the distance, beyond the edge of the fields, the isles lie quiet. Celtic lands. places of mist, ruined stones, and forgotten gods. You've never been there, but stories drift from the western shores. And lately, those stories sound quiet. Like even the bards have run out of songs. The Celts, once fierce, poetic, filled with lore, are vanishing into the fog. In Ireland and Britain, famine creeps like mold through valleys and across moors. Crops fail, rivers shrink. Even the sheep wander as if confused by the season. But it's not just hunger. It's a spiritual unraveling. The Druids, the ancient keepers of the old ways, are fading. Not all at once. No grand battle, just silence. Shrines abandoned. Sacred groves left to rot. Ceremonies postponed until spring. Then spring never really comes. In the early medieval annals of Ireland, 536 and 537 are recorded as years without bread. That phrase again. It follows you everywhere now, as if someone etched it across the sky in ghostly runes. You picture a small hill fort in Wales perched on a cliff edge. The fire pit is cold, the stone walls damp. Inside, a woman lights a bundle of heather, trying to stir warmth from it. Her children huddle near the hearth, but the smoke just chokes them. There's no heat. The peat is too wet to burn. She hums an old song, but halfway through she forgets the words. Historians still argue whether the Celtic cultural collapse during this time was due to the environmental shock alone, or if the slow spread of Christianity, economic hardship, and isolation all conspired together. But on the ground, it doesn't feel like a grand transition. It feels like forgetting. Forgetting names. Forgetting gods. Forgetting how it felt to dance in the sun. You hear from a monk who traveled through Cornwall last winter. He says entire villages had disappeared. Not just empty, but overgrown, as if swallowed back by the land. He came across one circle of stones clearly sacred, but no one remembered its name, or what it meant. Just that they used to leave flowers there in spring. And now no spring, no flowers, just stones and wind. The bards still try, of course. You hear one sing in your town's square voice, trembling in the chill. He wears a plaid cloak too thin for this endless winter. His fingers are purple with cold. His lyre is missing a string. Still he sings. He sings of Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth, where the sun never fades and fields stay green forever. He sings it like a memory, like he's seen it, like he wants to go back. You slip him a piece of bread. He nods, eyes full of something that might be thanks or shame. Even the monks, those fragile bridges between the pagan past and the Christian present, are struggling. Scriptoriums go dark. Illuminated manuscripts, half finished, lie untouched as hunger pulls the scribes away. A friar confesses to you that he's been eating the sheepskin parchment scraps. Soft as bread, he says, laughing a little too hard. You want to laugh too, but you're too tired. There's a story spreading now, told in hushed tones along the western coast, that the mists are the breath of the earth, Mother herself, withdrawing from the world. That she's tired, that she's dying. You hear that in Scotland, the Picts have begun painting not just their bodies, but their homes, with dark symbols, wards against the sky. In parts of Ireland, some villages are burying idols, hoping the gods' return underground will reset the balance. One fringe tale says a Celtic chieftain ordered a burning of all Roman books in his hall scrolls brought by priests and traders. He said we had sun before their letters. The pile burned hot enough to melt the pewter buckle off his robe. You think about that a lot. The way fear makes people look for something, anything to blame. You reach for stories too. Lately, you've been listening more when the traveling wise woman visits. She speaks of ley lines, of cursed winds, of old spirits, angry at the iron plows, and the roads carved too deep into sacred hills. You don't believe her. Not really. But you still listen. Because her voice is warm, and these days that's a rarity. The Celts don't disappear all at once. Their culture endures, reshapes, adapts. But something inside it softens, flickers. You see it in the art, once wild and looping, now stiff and constrained. You see it in the eyes of travelers from the Isles, the brightness dimmed. And you wonder if maybe when a people lose their springtime, they lose their stories. You walk outside. The fog hasn't lifted. It's thicker, if anything. Your footprints from yesterday are still there, unchanged, as if the world's been holding its breath. You whisper the name of a river god you learned as a child. You don't know if anyone still prays to him. But just in case, you add, come back soon. Somewhere south of the Himalayas, across the jungles and river valleys, monks bow before a stone Buddha blackened with soot. You wouldn't recognize the chants, but you'd recognize the posture, shoulders, low heads, bowed not just in reverence, but exhaustion. Even here in India, where the Ganges flows like a lifeline and temples rise into sky-painted towers, the sun has dimmed. It's not immediate, not as sharp as in Europe or China, but you hear it in scattered rumors, pilgrims passing through your village, talking about poor rains in the Deccan's strange mist in the Punjab, and smoke-colored skies drifting down over the Vindhya hills. A merchant from Gujarat once told you in halting Greek that his pepper boats had turned back because the harbors smelled like fire and the stars refused to guide them. You didn't understand him then. Now you do. In India, temples flicker with fading lamps. Monasteries, especially Buddhist ones, feel the pressure. These grand institutions depend on food gifts, grain, and generosity. But what happens when the harvests fail, when even the pious must choose between giving and surviving? They stop giving. And suddenly, the monasteries, those serene islands of prayer and scholarship, begin to dry up. Slowly, quietly, like wells left untended. You imagine a monastery in Nalanda, one of the greatest learning centers the world has ever seen. Scribes hunch over half-filled scrolls. The rice porridge grows thinner each week. Novices sweep the courtyard, not just out of discipline, but to keep rats from stealing the last grains left in offering bowls. One elder speaks of the ash in the sky as karma, the slow return of debts unpaid. Another whispers that the great bodhisattvas have turned away for now, that this is a test, a trial before the next awakening. But in the kitchens, the pots are mostly empty. Historians still argue whether Buddhist decline in parts of India during this era was climate-related, political, or cultural. But as you listen to a saffron-robed monk explain that his entire order moved south in search of warmth, it's hard not to see the signs aligning. He speaks of students leaving, donations vanishing, temples quieting, and not just Buddhist ones. The Hindu temples, too, feel the strain. Fire sacrifices become smaller. Priests struggle to gather clean ghee and wood. Festivals once lit by hundreds of oil lamps now barely glow. Even the Ganges seems sluggish, its holy water muddied by silt and faint ash that no one dares name. There's one particularly odd tale told by a merchant from Tamilakam. He speaks of a village that held a reverse festival, not a celebration, but an apology. They brought broken pots, not offerings, covered their idols in black cloth. The priests fasted for 3 days, praying not for blessings, but against further punishment. He says the sky was gray the whole time. The birds didn't sing once. Further south, a fringe sect begins chanting only at night, believing daylight to be cursed. They wear copper masks, supposedly to filter the ash, though no one's sure if they work. One of them tells a passerby the sun is asleep. We must whisper until it wakes. You wonder if they're entirely wrong. Back in the north, in the Gupta successor states, coins become smaller. silver grows scarce, and temples begin accepting offerings of labor instead of goods. You give a day of sweeping or hauling in, return for a bowl of lentils. No one complains. It's better than nothing. You hear of sages debating whether the age has shifted from the Dvapara Yuga to Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, the end of Dharma, the breakdown of order. You don't know the Sanskrit, but the feeling's familiar. One monk passing through your village on the way to a port city stops to warm himself by your fire. He tells you this. When people lose the sun, they lose their center. And without the center, even silence grows loud. You ask what he means. He says nothing more. The next morning, he's gone. In some areas of the subcontinent, the rains don't come. In others, they come too much at the wrong times. The monsoon dances out of step. Some farmers abandon their fields and try to sell prayers instead. Others sell their tools, and everywhere people retreat. Not just from travel or trade or ambition, but from belief. You picture 1,000 small shrines, their offerings eaten by rats, their statues wearing cobwebs instead of garlands. You imagine a priest whispering Vedic hymns to an altar that no longer echoes back. Because sometimes it's not about faith being lost. Sometimes it just goes quiet. Like the birds. Like the sun. Like you. They used to call it the kingdom of Axum, stone-carved, gold-trimmed rich, from incense, ivory, and iron. Ships once bobbed in the Red Sea under its flag, their hulls stacked with Ethiopian obsidian and Roman glass, their sails fat with monsoon winds. Now the sea is quiet. You hear about it not from a sailor, but a spice dealer stranded in your village, sunburned and barefoot, who mutters between sips of spoiled wine, Axum's vanished. Red Sea's just empty. You blink. Axum. That's one of those names you only hear in stories, the African kingdom across the waves that carved temples into mountains and minted coins with its own kings' faces. The place where frankincense was so common, it perfumed the walls. Gone, he shrugs. Maybe not gone, he corrects, but slipping. You sit back trying to imagine what it means for a kingdom to slip. Not collapse in fire and war, but just sink into silence. In the years after 536, the people of Axum must have looked up and seen the same sunless sky, the same strange haze. But here on the Horn of Africa, that dimming had an added cruelty. It stole the sea. Axum's power wasn't just land. It was water. Its lifeblood came through trade, through ports like Adulis, bustling cities, where ivory met silk and Roman merchants haggled over cinnamon with bearded priests. Now ships sit in harbors with no one to load them. Winds don't blow right. Stars don't guide right. And worst of all, the customers stop coming. Historians still argue whether Axum's decline was caused by climate shift, economic isolation, or religious transformation. Some suggest rising Islam eventually cut trade routes through Arabia. But if you ask the old sailor now living in your barn, it started with the sky. It just changed, he says. The waves stopped talking. You learn that monsoons, the winds vital to Indian Ocean trade, turned erratic. Storms struck out of season. Some sailors refused to leave port, afraid of going blind in endless fog. Others set sail and never came back. And if trade dies, cities follow. You picture the port of Adulis, once alive with noise and color. Now shutters closed, temples quiet. Frankincense warehouses filled with unsellable resin. And inland, the capital Axum itself, built on hills and ambition. Great obelisks towered over tombs, symbols of a kingdom tied to both earth and sky. You've seen one once etched in a trader's book, a stone needle stabbing toward heaven. But even stone weathers under ash. With less food and fewer ships, the economy buckles. People leave cities for the countryside. Stone palaces go dark. The markets stop singing. And slowly, quietly, Aksum turns inward like a turtle drawing into its shell. You hear a fringe tale that a priest in the Ethiopian highlands predicted it, that he looked into a basin of still water and saw the reflection of a starless sky. He called it Zemene Mesafint, the era of princes, a time when kings would lose their reach and small lords would rule from shaded valleys. He was a few centuries early, but maybe his basin saw the long path beginning here. Because in Aksum too, stories change. Christianity had taken root there long before it was cool. Ethiopia was one of the first Christian nations, and the Aksumite cross became a symbol of identity. But after 536, the churches get quieter. Bishops write fewer letters. Inscriptions on church walls grow simpler, as if hands tremble in the cold. The ash even here whispers. And so the kingdom of Aksum begins to move not forward, not upward, but away. Into the highlands, into obscurity. The great stone cities are left to the moss. The ports are abandoned to the tide. The coins stop being minted. One generation later, and people start asking if Aksum was a myth. You stare at the horizon. No ships, no sails. Just the wind sighing over empty waters. And you understand. Some kingdoms die with a crash. Others, like Aksum, simply fade like words at the edge of a page. You're huddled under your cloak near the village fire pit, what's left of it anyway, when a strange visitor arrives. He doesn't speak your language. His tunic is stitched from bright feathers, and he wears wooden sandals too thin for the cold. You think it's a dream at first until he hands you a scrap of cloth. On it, a crude map, nothing like Roman scrolls. It's all spirals, glyphs, and strange lines pointing far across the sea. You don't understand much, but he keeps repeating the word Maya. You'll only piece it together later, much later, when monks and scholars bring back stories from faraway lands. But the truth is, even the Maya felt the darkness. Far west past the oceans, you only know from whispered stories and sailors' songs, great cities once rose from the jungles, Tikal Kopan Kalakmal, carved with obsidian blades and echoing with the deep sounds of drums and rain. Their pyramids stabbed the sky. Their calendars carved time itself. But something around the same time your skies dimmed and your crops failed began to change there too. The rains stopped. In a place where rain was life, the sky forgot how to weep. The Maya didn't have winters like you do. No ice, no frost. But they had their own form of death from above drought. And when the great reservoirs dried, when the cenotes ran low, people began to worry. Not just about thirst, but about time itself. The Maya tracked time with obsessive precision. Their long-count calendar could trace eons. But around this period, just after 536, something shifts. Dates grow sparse. Monument building slows. In some cities, it stops entirely. Historians still argue whether the drop in solar radiation caused by the volcanic haze reached all the way to Central America. But if it did, less sunlight means cooler oceans. Cooler oceans mean disrupted rainfall. And for the Maya, that meant disaster. You hear it in a traveling bard song, translated through 3 tongues and 2 half-drunk interpreters, that the lords of Tikal feared the sky had turned its face. They performed rituals, bloodletting, sacrifices. But the rain didn't return. One fringe story claims that a king in Kopan ordered a new pyramid begun during the sunless days, its stones carved with images of weeping suns and fasting gods. But the workers stopped showing up. The jungle began reclaiming the site before it was finished. Meanwhile, back in your village, the traveler draws lines in the ash by the fire. He taps the spiral he keeps pointing to, Chichen or Tizkin, you can't tell which. His voice rises and falls like a prayer. You think he's telling you about his people's own time of darkness. You can't speak to him. But you both understand. Something happened to the world, not just to your little patch of it. And maybe, just maybe, the Maya saw it coming. They were astronomers after all. Their sky gods didn't like surprises. They read eclipses like prophecies. So when the heavens went dim for no reason, you bet they noticed. You imagine a stone observatory in Palenque high above the jungle. A priest squinting at a sun that won't shine, checking his almanac and whispering to himself. You picture scribes frowning over glyphs, trying to fit this endless twilight into their calendar math. Maybe they even added a new day, the day the light died. You wonder what their rituals looked like during the haze. Torches lit by midday. Feathered priests bleeding from the tongue. Children standing in line at dry wells. And then it hits you. The fog didn't just steal light, it stole certainty. From the Andes to Anatolia, from the Norse to the Nile, it cracked open reality like a dropped jar. Even here, with your calloused hands and sore knees, you feel it. The way the seasons no longer follow rules. The way people stop trusting clocks, shadows, or even time itself. You ask the traveler where he's going. He points west. You ask if the darkness followed him. He nods. Then he shows you a small bundle, carved bones, black beans, a scrap of jaguar fur. Offerings, he says, for the gods of rain. And you understand exactly what that means. He leaves at dawn. You never learn his name. But for years afterward, whenever the sky goes gray again and the fire sputters low, you find yourself drawing spirals in the dirt and wondering if even the Maya couldn't outlast the sky. Who can? You're crouched beside the hearth, warming your hands over a fire that barely burns when a strange idea stirs in your mind. What if the sky left behind a record? Not a scroll, not a stone tablet, but something quieter, something deeper. You think about trees. The old one near the riverbank rings thick as coins, each layer a memory. You remember once long ago an elder showed you a tree cross-section and said, "This one here, that was the hard year, cold summer. Everyone ate bark." You never forgot that. Centuries later, far away, scientists will do the same thing but on ice. They'll travel to Greenland and Antarctica, drill deep into ancient glaciers, and pull out what looks like a frozen candle. And in that icy scroll, they'll see 536 staring back at them. Not in ink, but in sulfur, in spikes of volcanic glass, in trapped bubbles of ancient air tasting faintly of fire and rot. They'll find chemical fingerprints clear as writing that screams something burned big and bad, and it blackened the whole sky. One ice core, dated precisely to this time, will show a massive spike in sulfate concentration, followed by years of depressed temperature markers. Tree rings from Scandinavia and Siberia will confirm it. 36 wasn't just a bad year. It was one of the worst years in recorded history. Not legend, not metaphor, fact. But you don't have ice cores or carbon analysis. You have your bones. And they tell you it's cold when it shouldn't be. They tell you the sun lies now. The trees tell you too. You cut one down this morning and the new ring was thin tight, like the tree had been holding its breath all year. And when you split it, the wood splintered, sharp and dry. No spring sap, no softness. You remember a grove near the eastern hill. Each year, someone would carve their name into a different tree, sort of a village tradition. You visit it now and notice something strange. All the trees have thinner bark than they used to. Their names are fainter. Some are cracked clean through. Even the trees are retreating. Historians still argue whether the eruption that caused this left its mark in Iceland, El Salvador, or somewhere else entirely. Some even say it might have been multiple eruptions, spaced just enough to prevent the Earth from catching its breath. One fringe theory mentions a massive equatorial volcano, perhaps in Indonesia, erupting with such force that it launched ash into the stratosphere, where it could circle the globe for months, even years. That's how it reached you. That's why your sun feels like a dying candle. You picture a mountain half a world away, exploding silently into the sky, and the sky noticing. The idea chills you. You scratch your initials into a post near your home, wondering if the wood will even remember you. If decades from now, someone will cut it down and say, "Ah, yes, the hard years, the sunless ones," because the world is keeping score. Quietly, in frost-damaged wood and glacier breath, in the pollen that never appeared, and the rings that came too tight. You find yourself staring longer at shadows now, not because they help tell time, but because they're strange, pale, blurred, like the sun forgot how to draw. One of the older villagers claims he hasn't seen his shadow walk properly in over a year. He says it as a joke, but no one laughs. You hear of scholars far to the east using water clocks, incense clocks, anything to measure time now that sundials are useless. You picture them surrounded by tools, frowning at candles that melt too fast or too slow. Nothing makes sense anymore. Another man passing through your town shows off a strange device, a copper bowl filled with oil and a floating wick. He calls it his solar substitute. He lights it at dawn, snuffs it at dusk. A way to keep rhythm in a world that's lost the beat. You like that idea. You decide to do the same. That night you fill a small clay dish with animal fat and make your own sun. You light it carefully. Its flame dances a bit. Not bright, but steady, and you stare at it. For hours. Not just for warmth, but for proof that something still glows. Even if the sky forgot how. You wake to a sound you haven't heard in months. A low rumble far away, like a giant exhaling beneath the earth. It's not thunder. You've heard enough thunder to know its shape. This is different, rounder, deeper. It vibrates in your chest, not your ears. You pause, breath held, waiting for the ground to twitch. It doesn't. But still, something moved. Later that day, a trader from the north face, soot-streaked and eyes too wide, comes through town with nothing to sell, only warnings. There's smoke on the sea, he says, and fire under the ice. Your skin prickles. Iceland. You've never seen it. Never will. But stories flow down like cold rivers. They speak of a land where steam hisses from cracks in the rocks, where the ground breathes and the mountains don't sleep. And now scholars think it might be the source. They dig into ice and soil and find tephra volcanic ash whose chemical fingerprint matches deposits buried deep in Iceland's volcanic heart. In cores pulled from Greenland's ice, a distinct layer shows up right around 536. A soot signature, bold and black, stretching across centuries like a scar. Historians still argue if Vatnafjöll or Katla, or even Eldgjá, was responsible volcanoes with names like throat clearings buried under glaciers and wrapped in mystery. But you don't need names. You feel it. The taste in the air. The chalk on your tongue. The way your clothes collect fine grit that no fire in your hearth could make. Something massive erupted. Not just smoke and rock, but sulfur flung high into the stratosphere, where winds carried it like poison mist across the globe. Scientists later calculated millions of tons of material launched skyward enough to cool the Earth's surface by 2 to 2.5 degrees for over a year, all from one distant blast. Or maybe, not just one. One fringe theory suggests that the Icelandic eruption, was the second act that something earlier, maybe in the tropics, set the stage, and Iceland followed with a knockout blow. A global tag team of tectonic terror. You imagine it like this, a great volcanic drumbeat echoing from continent to continent, each blast shaking a different part of the world. You were just unlucky enough to live during the chorus. And Iceland, maybe it was the loudest note. You ask the trader what he saw. Snow, black as coal, he says. Fields of ice melted into pits of steam. Sheep cooked in the pastures. Even the horses ran. He pauses. The sky went red, he adds quietly. For days. You nod. You've seen red skies too, sunsets so violent they looked painted in blood. But to live beneath the eruption, that's something else. Some locals in those northern lands carved runes to mark the event. Some whispered it was Surtur, the fire giant of Norse myth, rising to begin Ragnarok. Others simply packed what they could and fled south, their footprints trailing ash. But even now, centuries later, geologists dig into Iceland's lava flows and find the story still cooling. Layered basalt, sulfide veins, glass particles sharp enough to cut lungs. The Earth remembers. It keeps a record. And as more ice cores are pulled from the Arctic, researchers find a striking match. The same chemical trace in Iceland's ash appears thousands of miles away in soils and snows all over the northern hemisphere, like a signature written in soot. The scholar who tells you this in your later years is breathless with excitement. He's drawn a map, black dots where the ash was found, all pointing back to that one frozen island with its sleeping giants. You ask him if they'll erupt again. He smiles, not kindly. They never stopped, he says. We just haven't noticed yet. You dream that night of a mountain shuddering open, cracking like a rotten tooth. Fire pours upward, not down. The stars flicker, then vanish behind a curtain of smoke. When you wake, your mouth tastes like ash. You think about Iceland, how it might have thrown a veil over the world without ever knowing. You think of all the villages that never wrote their stories down, all the fields that never recovered, all the names no one remembers, and you wonder, if one mountain could silence the sun, how many more sleep beneath your feet? You sit near the stream bed, turning a pebble in your hand, and think, what if it wasn't just one mountain? That idea has been curling at the edges of your mind, like smoke, impossible yet oddly convincing. Because the sky hasn't just dimmed, it's stayed dim. Not for a day or a week, but for years. One eruption that might bring disaster, but 3. That's how you unmake a world. Long after your bones have returned to dust, scientists will start connecting dots like children with chalk lines. Ice cores, tree rings, mineral traces, and they'll discover something chilling. 536, 540, and 547 all show signs of massive volcanic activity, like drums echoing through a global canyon. You didn't know it then, of course, but you felt the rhythm of it. The way just when you thought it was getting better, the frost breaking birds, returning shadows, lengthening it, hit again, and again, and again. Historians will eventually call it a volcanic triplet, a cascade of geological violence unseen in human memory. The first blow, the one that dimmed the sun, set the world reeling. The second, just 4 years later, struck before recovery had even begun. The third, that one seemed almost cruel. You think of it like waves. The first swept your house away. The second drowned what was left. The third whispered, "You're not getting up." And yet even now the debate rages. Was the first eruption in the northern hemisphere Iceland, perhaps? Or Alaska? Was the second from Ilopango, a monstrous caldera in modern-day El Salvador, whose final blast may have cracked the heavens? Fringe theories go further. Some point to Indonesia, home of forgotten mountains, swallowed by jungle whose breath still steams in the morning. Others suggest South America, where Incan legends speak of gods buried alive beneath stone. You hear some of these whispers filtered through travelers and tattered sailors who return with wild tales and burned skin. One tells of a place where the trees stood black and still, as if waiting for fire to return. Another swears he saw two suns in the sky, once one real one, just a reflection bouncing off the endless ash. You laugh, but nervously. Because even here, far from any volcano, the sky has changed too often to be the work of one mountain alone. You've begun to see it in the land. The fruit trees bloom late, then drop their petals without fruit. The soil clumps refuses to absorb rain. Worms, once plentiful, are scarce. Your chickens wander in circles like they've forgotten how to scratch. And the people, they've learned not to hope. That's the real damage. Hope used to bloom with the first frost, melting the first shoots of barley poking through the soil. But after the second darkness, no one even plants early. Why waste seed? Why believe the sun will come back when it didn't last time? One man in the next village builds a sundial, freshly carved, beautifully etched. You admire his optimism, but 2 weeks later he uses it as firewood. The shadow never moved. And so this theory, 3 eruptions, staggered and merciless, starts to sound more like truth. The earth coughed not once, but in painful succession, a planet-wide fever dream, and you were caught in the middle. You picture it like this, a chain of sleeping giants waking up in turn, each angered by the last's groan. The first explodes, the second answers, and the third seals the fate. The climate doesn't bounce back. It sinks deeper. The storms come wrong. Winds twist strangely. You walk east and find snow where there should be grass. You dig for roots and find only rot. You try to trade for fish, but the rivers have gone empty or acidic. You start talking to the sky, not in prayer, not even in rage, just casual, half-sane conversation. What next, you ask? Got anything left? The sky never answers, but it never clears either. One night you sit outside and see something flicker, a false dawn. Not the sun, something else. Maybe lightning above the clouds. Maybe an aurora. Maybe the memory of heat. You almost cry. Because that's the worst part. It almost gets better. And then it doesn't. You hear that in distant lands, people have new calendars now marking years, not by kings, but by eruptions. The year of red snow, the second ashfall, the long hunger. You realize your own calendar has changed too. You don't say spring or summer. You say the warm week or before the second frost. And in this new world of broken seasons and thin fire, the idea of one eruption sounds merciful. But 3-3 made this your life now, and there's no going back. The empire still stands, but it doesn't walk with confidence anymore. It limps. You hear stories from Constantinople that don't sound like stories anymore. They sound like warnings. Once the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire as they'll later call it, was a beacon of wealth and wonder. Marble palaces, golden mosaics, scholars debating under painted domes. Now even the marble looks tired. Emperor Justinian still reigns. He clutches the throne like a man holding onto a branch in a flood. His face, once youthful in coins and statues, is now said to be gaunt, pale, touched by the plague and the weight of too many bad years. Because he's not just fighting barbarians, he's fighting the earth. The ash in the sky, the crops failing across his provinces, the ships, too afraid to sail, he battles all of it with imperial decrees and prayer. But the sky doesn't listen. And then the plague returns. You hear about it in whispers, carried on the salt winds of a fisherman's tongue. Black boils, buboes in the groin, death by the second day. It's worse this time. In 541, just a few years after the first darkness fell, the Justinianic plague strikes in full. Scholars later identify it as Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium that will kill millions in the 14th century. But this is its debut, its first world tour. It enters Constantinople by ship, tucked in the fur of a rat carried ashore by a flea that's just trying to eat. Within weeks, the city chokes. Bodies pile in alleys. Whole families vanish behind locked doors. Justinian himself falls ill. He survives barely, but something behind his eyes dies. He no longer speaks of divine glory, only stability. You imagine the great Hagia Sophia, that luminous dome of gold and faith echoing not with choirs, but with coughing. Priests praying louder not for salvation, but for survival. And even here in your village, the ripples reach you. Trade grinds to a halt again. But this time, not because of ash or ice. This time it's fear. The roads are silent. The ports locked. The empire becomes a map of quarantines. And you start to see what it looks like when a system bleeds out. Justinian had dreams of reconquest. He sent generals westward to reclaim North Africa, Italy, even parts of Spain. Victories were won, cities taken. But now those armies return with fewer men than they left with. Not from battle, from sickness, from hunger. And the empire, it stretches thin, like too little butter over too much bread. Historians still argue whether the plague of Justinian killed 25% or 50% of the Eastern Empire's population. Some say it broke the Roman spine. Others claim it was just another blow in a century full of them. But from your perspective, it's simple. This is how empires bleed. Slowly, quietly, through ports and lungs and panicked whispers. Even the elite suffer now. You hear of senators hoarding grain and dying with full cellars, of silk merchants sealing themselves into their homes with armed guards, only to find the disease was already inside, of bishops performing mass to empty pews. And yet Justinian still builds. That's the strangest part. Even as bodies burn in trenches, he commissions new churches, new monuments, new laws. His Corpus Juris Civilis, a massive legal code meant to unify the empire, is compiled even as scribes die in their chairs. The ink outlasts the hands that wrote it. You respect that, in a way. Building while the world collapses that takes either genius or madness, or maybe both. One day a pilgrim passes through. He's seen the capital. He's lost his brothers to the plague. And he carries a relic, a splinter of wood, said to be from the true cross. You don't believe it, but you don't tell him that. He sleeps by your fire. You share barley soup. That night, he says, the empire isn't falling. It's changing shape. You remember that. It feels true, because Justinian's world, Rome's world, is still standing. But it's becoming something else. Something colder, quieter, less Roman, more Byzantine. Less public baths, more candlelit prayers, less marble, more mortar, less people. One fringe tale says Justinian began speaking to ghosts near the end, that he claimed to hear old emperors warning him in dreams, that he whispered back, "It's not my fault." Maybe it wasn't. Maybe he just inherited the worst century in 1,000 years. And maybe as you stare into your cracked bowl of porridge and wrap your shawl tighter around your shoulders, you wonder what history will remember. Will they talk about Justinian's laws, or the smell of the burning pits? Because for you, the empire's bleeding edge isn't in battles or scrolls. It's in what's missing. The laughter, the trade bells, the sun. You don't remember the exact day it began. Only that one morning the light was almost normal. Not golden, not warm, but clearer, like the sky had finally washed its face. The birds made a few hesitant sounds. The frost held off until after sunrise. You stepped outside, blinked at the brightness, and dared to hope. But hope is a fragile thing. Because the next day, the gray returned, thicker than ever. The air heavy, the cold sharp. And you realized the night was not over. You've been living in a kind of twilight for so long, you've forgotten what real light feels like. But now, after 18 months of dim skies, broken seasons, and sunless days, the weight of it starts to change you. Not just your body, your mind. At first you counted the days, marked notches on the doorframe, kept track of the sun's position, the frost, the melt. Now you measure time in firewood stacks and the number of mice caught in your traps. Whether your knees ache in the morning or all day, whether the snow crunches beneath your feet or simply sighs into slush. The long night has made you quiet. It's done that to everyone. You pass neighbors without speaking. No one has the energy for gossip. Even the village children no longer play. They sit in corners, eyes wide, silent as pottery. And somewhere deep in your bones, a question stirs. What if the sun never returns? You ask it casually, at first half joking, then more often. Then you stop asking out loud because the silence that follows is worse than an answer. Even the priests seem unsure. The old ones claim it's a test. The younger ones don't even try to explain. They just lead shorter prayers, burn incense faster, and leave before dark. Historians will later confirm what you already know. The sun dimmed for well over a year, some records say 18 months of hazy twilight, where noon looked like dusk and the moon glowed brighter than it should. In Syria, Procopius writes that the sun shone for about 4 hours a day, but even that was weak and colorless. In China, the histories mention frost in summer and failed harvests for 3 years straight. In Rome, a chronicler describes a thick air and darkness without clouds. Even the stars seem reluctant to show themselves now. You remember looking up at the night sky as a child, pointing out constellations, tracing gods in the stars. But these days the heavens are pale, muted, half hidden, like the universe has turned its face away. And the cold, it burrows into places you didn't know were hollow. You sleep beside the fire, wrapped in everything you own, and still dream of ice. One morning, a traveling mason, half-starved hair, crusted with frost, passes through and tells you the Rhine has frozen over. You shake your head. That's a river, you say. That doesn't freeze. He shrugs. It does now. You trade him half a turnip for the news. You learn that across Europe, watermills have stopped turning clogged with ice. Wine barrels burst from freezing. Olive groves have died back to blackened stumps. And then he tells you this: they say the sun is wounded. That night, you lie awake and imagine the sun as a great eye in the sky, bruised and swollen, unable to open. You wonder what could wound something so vast. A god, a stone, a mountain, tearing itself open and screaming ash into the sky. You don't know. But the wound is real. One fringe belief says the earth is wrapped in a cloak of penance, spun by the sins of all nations. Another says the sun has been eaten by a sky beast and must be reborn. You find both oddly comforting, because at least they offer a reason. But the reality centuries later will be colder, a volcanic veil high in the stratosphere, scattering sunlight, dimming the world. A cloud so fine it couldn't be seen, but powerful enough to rewrite weather patterns, stall seasons, and leave your world in slow motion. And here's the thing you never expected. After enough time in the dark, you start to forget light. You adjust. You adapt. Your body shifts into survival mode. You walk slower. You eat less. You think in hours, not days. Your goals shrink to get through this morning and don't burn the last candle. You used to fear the long night. Now you fear what comes after. Because if the sun does return, will you recognize it? Or will it burn your eyes with memories you can't bear to recall? When it finally begins to warm again just slightly, you notice something strange. It's not hope, it's fear. You're standing in your field watching frost retreat from the edges of the furrows. And all you can think is, what's next? Because this isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of something else, something longer, messier, harder to track. The dominoes are falling now one by one. You just can't see how far they'll go yet. Historians will later call it the late antique Little Ice Age, a multi-decade downturn in global temperatures, triggered by those volcanic eruptions of the 530s and 540s. The world didn't just dip, it staggered. And so did you. Every change feels like a punishment now. A warm breeze doesn't mean spring, it means floods. Because the rivers swell with melt they weren't built to hold. Rain doesn't help, it drowns the fragile crops struggling to rise from ruined soil. You watch a neighbor's house slide downhill after a rainstorm. The foundations, softened by years of frost, just gave up. No one was inside. But it still leaves a silence in the village, like a breath held too long. And that's just here. Elsewhere, the world is in motion. In Arabia, tribes begin migrating more frequently. The cold pushed them southward. The scarcity sharpens their hunger. New voices begin to rise in the desert, spiritual, political, furious with purpose. In Europe, small kingdoms splinter. Migrations begin again. Whole families pack carts with whatever hasn't rotted and move south. No maps, just rumors of warmer lands. The borders blur, the identities shift. You can't even remember who ruled what before all this began, and you no longer care. All that matters is, where can I survive next? You've seen 5 different groups pass through your village in the last 2 years. Some stay a night, some a season. Some leave behind a few children. Others leave nothing but footprints. You start measuring years not by the calendar, but by who died, who left, and who was born in the cold. The Lombards move south into Italy. The Avars sweep across Eastern Europe, filling in the vacuum left by collapsing kingdoms. The Slavs, once fragmented and quiet, begin spreading westward, their footprints widening each spring. Even in China, where records remain dense and poetic, the dynastic transitions come faster. One court giving way to another under the weight of famine, failed harvests, and peasant revolt. Historians still argue whether the global migrations and upheavals of this era were entirely caused by climate or just accelerated by it. But on the ground, in the dirt, there's no question. You feel it in your knees. Everything is shifting. One monk calls it the age of movement. Another, more cynically, says it's just the age of collapse. But you can't help but notice the land doesn't break all at once. It shudders like a sheet of ice cracking in slow motion. A fringe theory begins to spread that the earth has entered a long turning a time when its breath shortens and its blood cools. That civilizations like forests must burn before they regrow. You don't know what to do with that idea, so you just keep planting, even when nothing grows, even when the new seeds rot the same way the old ones did. You try beans, then rye, then barley, then nothing. You eat moss again. You dream of pomegranates, though you've never actually seen one. Sometimes you think about the way your grandfather described seasons. His stories sound like fairy tales now. Warm rain, buzzing bees, fruit hanging low enough to grab. You try to imagine what that world felt like. You fail, because you weren't just hurt by this darkness. You were remade. You no longer expect life to return to what it was. You just hope the changes slow down, that the next domino will take a little longer to fall, because you know more are coming. You feel it in the wind. You wake to the smell of ash. Again. But this time it's different. There's no fire nearby. No hearth smoke. No village bonfire or burned stew. This ash rides in high drops in flakes so small you can barely see them, but you taste them. On your lips. On your teeth. It's happening again. The second blow. You barely survived the first wave of darkness, that long 18-month dusk that swallowed 536. You clawed through the famine, endured the pestilence, weathered the madness. You started to believe that maybe the world would recover. But in 540, the earth convulses once more. Somewhere out there, another volcano screams. Historians still argue about this one. Some say it was Ilopango, deep in modern-day El Salvador, hidden in the heart of a lake that swallowed a civilization. Others point toward Indonesia again, or even New Guinea. The debate continues. But here's what matters to you: the sun goes dim again. The summer comes, but the warmth doesn't again. The crops bloom early, then die confused again. And you feel the dread settle deeper than before. Because this isn't just a disaster, it's a pattern. You look to the sky and see it clouded not with storm but with memory, as if the earth remembers what it did last time and has decided to finish the job. The air turns cooler even faster this time. The frosts come sooner. You catch your own breath one morning and realize it's visible in May. The birds, those few that returned, have vanished once more. The forest is too quiet. The streams are too low. Even the weeds are struggling. You find yourself walking differently, slower, listening harder. You're not trying to survive the cold anymore. You're trying to predict it, feel it coming. Your bones ache again. Your skin dries out. The famine returns before you've even finished rebuilding the granary, and now the sickness rides in even faster. In some regions, especially in the east, the Justinianic plague surges back. Its second wave spreads through weakened cities like a knife through parchment. Populations that had just begun to regrow begin to hollow again. You hear of entire villages, especially in North Africa and the Levant, where not a single voice remains. The cities shrink further. The empires tighten their belts again. You ask a passing monk about Constantinople. He doesn't answer, just hands you a scroll with a single line scrawled across it: "The sun has turned against us." You fold it carefully, but never read it again. Because you felt the same thing for years. Even in China, records show another downturn. In 540, annals speak again of famine, pestilence, and cold. Crops wither, prices rise, families fracture. One emperor faced with unrest builds a temple to appease the heavens. It doesn't work. The dominoes fall faster now. People stop writing things down. That's how you know it's bad. Because even the monks, those stubborn scribes always copying scrolls even during storms, are leaving the ink pots dry. They've started planting instead, or praying harder, or fleeing. You don't blame them. You stop carving notches on your doorframe again. It's no longer about tracking days or darkness. It's just about surviving. Again. A fringe belief returns, one you'd laughed at years ago, that the sun is dying. Not in some grand cosmic way, but spiritually. That its warmth is being stolen piece by forgotten gods or broken laws. You've heard worse theories. You've lived them. Some say that 540 marks the end of the Old Age entirely. That the classical world, Rome, Persia, the Silk Roads, the temples of India, and the pyramids of Ethiopia truly shatters here, not in war, but in cold and rot. You believe it, because this time the darkness isn't unexpected. It's familiar. You know what to do. You ration the grain earlier. You burn the furniture before the firewood. You dig traps for animals you once wouldn't eat. You chew bark with a numb mouth and call it dinner. You don't cry this time, because you already did that back in 536. This time you wait. You don't pray, you don't beg, you just endure. And that's the real shift, isn't it? The earth has stopped asking for hope. Now it demands patience and a kind of silence. You hear a whisper in the marketplace, a name you haven't heard before. Muhammad. At first, it's just a name passed from one traveling merchant to another, like the threadbare coins that now barely hold value. A trader from Syria mentions him in passing between trades of salt and fermented fig paste. A quiet man, he says, but his words, sharp as flint. You don't think much of it. Not at first. You're more concerned about whether your bread will rise or if the goat will survive the frostbite on its hooves. Spiritual revolutions are low on your list. But later, after the third mention, this time by a monk who spent a season in the desert, you start to pay attention. He says something stirring in Arabia, in the harsh lands of sand and starlight, where caravans have always moved like shadows, and stories are older than maps. You know Arabia only as a distant place home to date spices and traders who rarely stay longer than a night. But now something else is rising there. A new belief, a voice, a change. Historians will later frame this as a seismic shift in global culture, the rise of Islam sparked by the revelations of Muhammad in the early 7th century. But for you, tucked away in your ash-choked village, it begins like a gust of warm wind from far away. Strange, comforting, possibly dangerous. Because ideas like seeds don't need perfect light to grow. Sometimes it's the ash that makes the ground fertile. And the world of 540 and beyond is a garden of ruin, fertile for change. The old powers are shaken. The Byzantines bleed. The Persians burn through kings like firewood. Trade is fractured, cities are shriveling, temples echo with fewer voices. The center cannot hold, so new centers begin to form. You hear of tribes once scattered across the Arabian Peninsula, now speaking with one tongue. Of merchants beginning prayers before their caravans. Of Mecca, once just a dusty hub, transforming into something more. And maybe, just maybe, it all starts because of the dark years, because of the famine, because of the plague. Because when people suffer, they stop asking what they own and start asking why they're here. You're not a theologian. You don't debate dogma over fire pits, but you recognize spiritual hunger. You've seen it behind the eyes of every person clutching a relic, carving a rune, whispering to a sky that no longer answers. You felt it in your own bones. A thirst not for water, but meaning. And that's what this new belief offers. Clarity, order, unity. In Arabia, a people hardened by wind and scarcity begin to believe not just in one God, but in the one God. In a voice that speaks in revelation, not riddles, in a code of law, a rhythm of prayer, a certainty sharper than any dagger, and it spreads. First slowly like dye-soaking cloth, then faster like fire finding dry brush. One fringe account you overhear in the market says there are warriors now mounted and wrapped in white who fight not for coin, but conviction. Who carry verses in their heads and swords at their sides. They don't steal, they don't hesitate, and they don't lose. Another says the old gods of the desert, those carved from wood and stone, have been broken, swept out like dust. And in their place, language, law, flame. You feel something shifting in the world again, not just ash and cold this time, but structure. Like someone laying bricks in a burned-out city. Historians still argue whether the environmental chaos of the 530s and 540s directly influenced the rise of Islam. Some say the correlation is coincidence. Others point to how the collapse of neighboring empires, the Byzantines and the Sasanians, made space for something new to grow. But if you ask a Syrian merchant who's just crossed the desert, he'll shake his head and say, the darkness made the world listen. And maybe it did. Because the people are ready. Ready for a prophet. Ready for purpose. Ready for something that doesn't shiver in the cold or vanish in the smoke. The Roman gods failed. The temples failed. Even the sun failed. But this new fire, it does not flicker. You don't convert, not yet. But you remember the name. You say it once under your breath just to hear how it sounds. Muhammad. And somewhere far away under clearer skies, a man walks alone into a cave. And the world holds its breath. The world doesn't just break during times like this. It tells stories about the breaking. And those stories, they stick. You hear them over fires, see them scrawled into stone and hide. They come in every shape, myth, vision, rumor, warning. No one knows what's true anymore. So people fill the silence with meaning. And out of the ash and ice, the monsters are born. You hear of a wolf the size of a tree that swallowed the sun and now lurks above the clouds, belly glowing with stolen fire. A girl claims she saw its shadow on a particularly dim afternoon. You believe her, or at least you want to. A boy recites a tale of sky serpents coiling above the mountains, their breath turning rain to poison. He draws them in the frost with his finger. You try to remember the shape. In the north, the Norse say it's the beginning of Ragnarok, the doom of gods. They speak of 3 winters with no summer, just like the one you've lived through. They talk of Fenrir, the wolf of Midgard's serpent, rising from the sea of Odin's last breath. You don't know their gods, but you do know the feeling of a world coming undone. The Celts further west whisper that the Sita, the Fae, have taken the sun for ransom, and only blood or bone will bring it back. Some begin leaving milk on stone altars again. Others disappear into the hills, searching for gates that no longer open. One of your neighbors builds a small shrine to a sun spirit she claims visited her in a dream. She leaves charcoal and feathers. No one questions her. Because at this point, who hasn't tried something, even the Christians begin speaking in new tones. Apocalyptic sermons, thundering chants. The book of Revelation feels timely now, doesn't it? Locusts, darkness, fire from the sky. Some begin calling Justinian the last emperor. Others say he's a sign of the beast. In Syria, a monk pens a prophecy, the sun shall grow pale, and men shall eat dust. He means it metaphorically. You don't. There's a tale you hear from a desert traveler that beneath the earth lies a sleeping being, a titan, who yawns once every 1,000 years. When it breathes out, the sky darkens. When it opens its eyes, the stars flee. He says it last awoke in your lifetime. He says it's still watching. Historians still argue whether these myths were born in response to the volcanic winters, or if they were old fears simply dressed in new disasters. But it doesn't matter really, not to you. Because when the crops fail and the sun doesn't rise properly and your breath fogs in the wrong seasons, your mind needs answers, even if they come with fangs. You begin collecting these tales like seeds, not to plant, but to carry, to remind yourself that others see what you see, that the fear has shape, and in shaping it, you can maybe survive it. There's a strange peace in the idea that this was meant to happen, that it was written in the stars, or sung by the gods, or whispered by bones in a cave long before you were born. Because chaos without meaning, that's unbearable. But chaos with a prophecy, that's a story. You remember one particular myth told by an old woman traveling from the east. She said there was once a city made entirely of glass hidden in the clouds. When people below forgot to be grateful for the sun, the glass cracked. and a fog poured out, blanketing the earth until memory itself was lost. Only when the last name is forgotten, she said, will the sun return. You asked her what she meant. She just smiled as if she'd already forgotten you. Even now, when the sky begins to clear in patches and the birds test their songs again, you don't trust it. Because the stories haven't ended. They've taken root. And now you carry them like weapons. Or maybe like prayers. Just in case the sun forgets you again. You sit by a dwindling fire one evening, nursing a cup of weak tea when someone asks the question aloud. What really caused all of this? No one answers at first. Because what can you say? Volcanoes, the wrath of gods, a curse, just the way of things. You've heard every theory by now. Some sound mad, others worse plausible. But none feel complete. Like pieces from 3 different puzzles jammed together to make sense of a shattered sky. Centuries from now, historians will still argue. They'll have better tools, satellites, chemical analysis, tree ring data, ice cores drilled from the poles, and they'll still disagree. Some say it all started with a massive volcanic eruption in 536, maybe in Iceland, based on the tephra layers. Others suggest Ilopango in El Salvador, the caldera so vast it makes lakes. A few point toward North America, where evidence hides beneath forests waiting for the right spade. But here's where the story really gets messy. It probably wasn't just one. The latest studies say the Earth was hit twice, maybe even 3 times in under a decade. A volcanic chain reaction, the likes of which no written history had ever captured. Each blast flinging ash into the stratosphere, each one blanketing the world a little more, locking sunlight out like a spiteful god pulling the blinds. And then the plague came. Some scholars try to draw clean connections. Volcanic winter weakens the population, famine follows, immune systems falter, rats, fleas, and the Justinianic plague race through broken cities. Others caution against being too neat. Correlation isn't causation, they mutter behind their glasses and charts. But to you, it all feels connected, like a story with no punctuation. Just one long, terrible sentence dragging on heavy with commas and dread. One fringe theory says it was a comet, not volcanoes at all. That a cosmic visitor shattered in the atmosphere and dusted the planet with reflective particles, dimming the sun and tipping nature sideways. Another proposes a solar minimum, a natural drop in solar output that just happened to coincide with massive eruptions. That would explain the strange auroras, the pale sun, the uncanny cold. You heard someone mention alien sky sneeze once. You never found out what they meant. Probably for the best. The truth is, no one really knows. Not even now. Not completely. And maybe that's the scariest part. Because we crave clean endings. We like knowing why. If it was a volcano, you can blame a mountain. If it was a comet, you can curse the stars. But what if the world just glitched? What if this is just the price of living on a planet that's still making itself? You think about that sometimes, how we're all guests on a rock that occasionally remembers it's on fire. You stir your tea. The steam curls upward, weak but determined. You don't need to know exactly what caused it. You just need to remember what it felt like. The hunger, the silence, the long dusk that swallowed time, and the way people everywhere tried to explain it in myths, in scrolls, in carvings and curses and stories told with trembling hands. You still hear the debates, even now, in taverns, in temples, in whispers by cold windows. Some demand evidence, some want closure. But you sit by the fire and let the question drift. Because sometimes the answer isn't what saves you. Sometimes it's just the telling that keeps you warm. The worst has passed. At least that's what people say now. The sun rises higher, though still through a dusty veil. The frost comes later. The fields, when they yield at all, offer more than weeds. You taste something sweet in a root this spring, and nearly weep. And in this pale dawn of recovery, you start to ask yourself, what did we learn, if anything? You walk past a field where new crops poke up from thawed soil. A child barefoot smiling chases a goat in lazy circles. Their laughter cuts through the air like bird song, and you realize it's been months, maybe years, since you heard that sound. It feels foreign, luxurious, but you're not fooled. You remember what it took to get here. You remember what was lost, and slowly the lessons begin to surface. Lesson 1: the earth is not tame. You grew up thinking seasons were rules, not suggestions. That the sun would rise, the river would thaw, and grain would grow. You now understand that nature is not a clock, it's a dragon, beautiful but capable of rolling over in its sleep and crushing everything. Lesson 2: civilizations are thinner than they look. Empires crumbled, trade routes disappeared. Royal decrees didn't bring warmth, and temples couldn't summon rain. Kings died just like farmers. Merchants, scribes, monks, soldiers, none were spared. You watched wealth turn into wood smoke. Lesson 3: community matters more than gold. You survived because someone shared a bowl of soup, because someone patched your roof with their last nails, because someone told a joke when the world was too cold to laugh. Coins rust. Kindness lasts. A monk once told you the dark years were a punishment. Another said they were a test. But maybe they were just a reminder everything can break. And if you want to keep going, you have to bend. You start to see changes now. Some subtle, others profound. The landowners are no longer untouchable. People remember who hoarded grain and who opened their doors. You heard of a village that exiled its former mayor, not for corruption, but for cowardice. Religions adjust. Old rites fade, new ones take root. You see more candles lit in doorways, more quiet prayers whispered not in cathedrals, but to the air. Some people carry rocks they believe protected them. Others sing hymns that never existed before. The world is rearranging itself. You hear of new methods of farming hardier grains, deeper irrigation channels. You see someone with a new kind of plow, thinner but sharper. People are no longer trying to recover the old ways. They're inventing new ones. You hear that in India, some monastic schools have reopened with fewer monks, but more urgency. In China, new dynasties rise, shaped by hunger and revolt. In Arabia, a new faith is beginning to collect fire. And in Europe, the patchwork kingdoms adapt, some with brutality, some with wisdom, most with both. Historians will later call this period the beginning of transition, from antiquity to the Middle Ages, from empire to kingdom, from sunlit certainty to candlelit resilience. You're not sure what to call it. You just call it after. One fringe theory says that the survivors of 536 AD carried genetic and psychological imprints that shaped generations, that their bodies adapted, that their stories rewired culture itself. You believe it. You've seen it. The way people look up at the sky differently now. Not with reverence, but suspicion. The way every warm day is met with cautious joy. The way people talk about food as though it's sacred. The way you feel when the air shifts, like you're listening for something. A whisper, a warning. The darkness taught you to be quiet, to share, to watch, to wait. It taught you not just how to survive, but how fragile survival is, and how strong you had to become to earn it. So now in this in-between world, not broken, not healed, you plant your seeds again. Not because you believe the sun will return, but because you know it might not. and still you plant. Because the lesson beneath all others is this: you continue. You're older now. You walk slower, think longer, and wake earlier, though not from duty, but habit. The dark years carved themselves into your bones, and even as the sun rises more confidently each spring, your body still flinches at every change in wind. But things have shifted. The world is no longer dying. It's rebuilding, unevenly, cautiously, but undeniably. You pass children chasing each other through wheat that actually stands tall. A young woman weaves new cloth, not patched rags. You catch the smell of bread baking, not root paste or boiled moss, but actual bread made from real grain. And every time you smell it, you almost cry. But then you look up at the sky, still pale, still a little wrong, because you remember. That's what you carry now. Memory of silence, of hunger, of breath you held for years, waiting for the sun to return. Most people talk about it less now. They prefer to look ahead. New roads, new leaders, new gods, new words for old seasons. But you sit by the fire and tell stories. Not just of the cold and ash, but of how people endured. Because what else can you leave behind? They call 536 the year the sky went dark. They're not wrong. But you remember the years that followed. The second eruption, the plague, the migrations, the rebuilding. And you know that was the real turning point. Not a single year, but a chain, a fracture, a furnace. Historians will fill books about this century. They'll debate climate models, measure isotopes, argue over tree rings. They'll craft timelines and theories trying to understand why the sun dimmed and why the world changed. And maybe they'll get close. But they won't know what it felt like. Only you know that. The way the silence hung heavier than snow. The way the cold made people forget birthdays, names, even songs. The way every firelight felt like a miracle. And so you speak gently, slowly, with pauses for breath and memory. You speak of ash on the bread, of no birds in spring, of the year there were no colors, only shades, but also of sharing, of survival, of the children born during the famine who now run laughing through the fields. Because the world did not end. It changed. And so did you. You wonder sometimes what might happen if it ever came again, if the sun dimmed tomorrow. Would people remember? Would they notice the birdsong vanish? Would they know what to eat, what to save, what to say to each other when the skies grow quiet and the earth forgets to bloom? You hope they would. And so with your last strength, you leave this behind. Not a warning. A memory. Because one day someone will see the frost in summer, the pale sun, the thin shadows, and they will be afraid. And they'll need your voice, your story, your truth. That we are not owed sunlight, that we are not promised spring, but we are all of us built to continue, even in the dark, especially then. So now you rest. The sky outside your window is quiet. The stars, if you can see them, flicker with that soft, ancient pulse they've always had. The wind rustles through the trees, a whisper not of warning, but of peace. You've traveled far tonight, through ash and silence, through fire and ice. You've felt the weight of a world in crisis and the resilience that bloomed in the cracks. Take a moment now and let your breath slow. Let your shoulders soften, because the story is over. The darkness once so total has passed, not forgotten, but survived. The people who lived through it carried their pain quietly, folding it into the corners of their culture, the edges of their songs, the wrinkles around their eyes. But they didn't just suffer. They adapted. They learned. They remembered. And now, so have you. Tonight, as you fall asleep, know this: even the longest nights end. Even the coldest winters give way to warmth. And even when the sun hides deep in cloud behind ash or beneath fear, it still waits. Always. Just beyond the veil. So close your eyes. Let the weight fall from your chest. Let time become soft. Tomorrow will come. And when it does, you'll be here. You'll rise. And so will the light. End of script. Sweet dreams.